A warm Pacific greeting and welcome to the virtual lab for Vaka Moana, a journey to an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean. My name is Mere, as you may have heard. I'm from Fiji, and it's my privilege to be your moderator today. Before we begin, please allow us to share a few housekeeping rules for everyone joining. You are welcome, if you would like, to rename yourself with your country name first and your first name second. Our administrators are taking care of mics and cameras, and you are also welcome always to use the chat for your comments or questions as we move through the program. In addition, we advise it could help to use headphones if that works best for you, and of course, keeping your camera off if connectivity becomes an issue. Since we are translating into French, we also kindly advise our speakers to speak slowly and clearly as much as we can. There will also be details on participating live via an online polling platform. And so finally, we are recording this event for later use by the International Ocean Decade community. And so we look forward to sharing it as well with those who are unable to make it. As I mentioned, we have a slide coming up now, welcoming you to log into a live polling platform called Slido. You can use these details, and we invite you to tell us what country you are joining from. I know we all registered stating our countries, and this is a chance for us to see live where we are all gathering from today. As you can see the details there, they're at slido.com, and you can use the registration code of #Vaka21. So it's obvious from everyone's registration details that so many of us logging in today share a curiosity and a deep love of the ocean and nature. One registrant even commented, "We are one ocean, we are in this together." Another one has stated, "Now is the time for Pacific youth to stand and advocate for our blue continent." We truly are in this together at a critical time. We can see the various countries we are logging in from populating live on the screen there. And we will be using this platform to engage with one another as we move through our voyage this afternoon. With this sentiment, please join us as we begin with opening remarks. We are privileged to be joined today by the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat and Pacific Ocean Commissioner, Mr. Henry Puna, and we welcome Mr. Henry Puna to deliver his remarks.
Today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings and kia orana from Wellington. I am pleased to join you all on this Vaka Moana, a journey to an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean. Our part of planet Earth, the blue Pacific continent, is 96% ocean. Together, our island countries are custodians of over 40 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. For us, therefore, the ocean is our past, it is our present, and it is our future. Pacific Islands Forum leaders have recognized this in their Ocean Statement of 2021. The potential of the ocean to meet our sustainable development needs is enormous. In fact, for small island developing states, the ocean is central to livelihoods and development aspirations. Unlocking this potential, however, is linked to, amongst other things, the impact of climate change and other human-induced activities on our ocean. This includes past and current challenges related to nuclear testing and contamination. In this regard, and looking beyond 2030, our Pacific leaders have called for a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to be adopted later this year. This strategy will provide a long-term vision of how we will protect our people, our place, and our prospects for our Blue Pacific. This United Nations Decade on Ocean Science provides an ideal opportunity for the evidence-based policy support we need to sustainably harness our ocean and its bounty and achieve the blue Pacific we want by 2050. However, a defining issue underpinning the full realization of our blue Pacific continent is the securing of all of our maritime zones against the threats of climate-related sea level rise. To this end, we are committed to a collective effort, including developing international law to preserve our members' maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. This will achieve stability, security, certainty, and predictability of our maritime zones and support sustainable development right across our Pacific region. At the international level, we also support the global goal to develop and implement a post-2020 global diversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. The end goal is an internationally legal binding instrument for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. As stewards of the Blue Pacific, we remain steadfast and committed to regional and international ocean governance that is inclusive, putting people and sustainability at the center of any ocean management approach. Improving our access and use of satellite technology will no doubt enable us to access data and information on our ocean. Through digital transformation and innovative engagement, we will improve our collective management and advocacy on our Blue Pacific Ocean priorities. The preparatory work spearheaded by the Pacific Community for the Decade of Ocean Science has identified some Pacific focus priorities. I will cover 3 of these. First, enhancing and mainstreaming capacity building and transfer of marine technology for small island developing states. 2, partnerships for financing and opportunities to access oceans data held by foreign governments and the private sector. 3, and of course, traditional knowledge. Our Blue Pacific is a region rich in culture and knowledge on oceans management. The current Ocean Science Decade provides an opportune moment for the region to develop traditional knowledge as the complement to formal science. This is an ideal opportunity to foster cooperation between scientists and holders of traditional knowledge. With this image of our Blue Pacific in mind, the delivery of the Decade on Ocean Science is a shared responsibility. It must involve not just the Blue Pacific, but all other oceans that make up the one global ocean of our planet. It must be owned by all nations and all people. From the private sector, maritime users, local communities, youth and women, all must contribute to significantly progress ocean science by 2030. This is also an opportunity to inspire and to engage. We want people to know the challenges and to understand the ways we are taking action in the Blue Pacific Ocean. Earlier this year, we launched a suite of publications, among them an incredibly special book targeting our future custodians of the ocean, our children. Titled Our Sea of Islands, Our Blue Pacific, the book hopes to inspire our children and the child in all of us to resonate with the ocean call, which brought the first Vaka Moana navigators to our Sea of Islands. For the people of the Pacific, the sustainability of our ocean is intertwined with our culture. It is our identity. It is our sovereignty. It is also our future. We must ensure no one is left behind as we journey together into this important and critical decade. Solid ocean science and policy, coupled with consistent, sustained action towards implementation, will be key to securing our Blue Pacific future and the shared future of all the oceans of the world, merging into the one global ocean. And as the Blue Pacific, we will continue to remind the world of this simple truth. We are the ocean, and we are all the oceans of the world. Our one blue planet of 8 billion people must all be ready to play our part. We are ready for this 10-year Vaka Moana journey, and we look forward to a successful, inspiring, and engaging oceans decade to 2030 and beyond. Meta ki mata, vinaka vakalevu, and I thank you all.
We thank Pacific Ocean Commissioner Puna for his time and his opening remarks today. Our ocean has inspired every single one of us who are here, and we are privileged to have received some of your messages in the lead up to today's event. Here are some of your descriptions. The ocean is my front and backyard. It is part of my being and being part of our Sea of Islands. Another inspiring comment is, being a Maohi, one cannot separate himself from Moana Nui Ahiva. With the ocean at the forefront of our lives and thoughts, we now welcome Reverend Nicotemo Sopepa of Tuvalu and the Pacific Theological College, who will deliver today's blessing in acknowledgement of Pacific peoples, past, present, and future, as stewards of our Blue Pacific. Reverend Nicotemo, I believe you might still be muted.
Can you hear me, Mary?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for this very important talanoa. I like to call it the talanoa deliberation on our Vaka Moana. I hope that my being invited to open this very important talanoa does not stem from the now common Pacific practice of rubber stamping a function with opening prayers. My hope is that my being invited stems from our acknowledgement and respect of our Moana spirituality that involves every aspect of life, both in principle and practice. I'd like to open by reading Genesis 1:1-10 and chapter 2, verse 7. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness and was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place. Let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land. and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord formed a man or human from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. What I want to highlight today from the reading is the intrinsic connection we have with the Moana. That which was in the beginning, then came the land, and from the land everything living. I see in the concept note sent to panelists that we are considered stewards of the Moana. This is the same language that is often used by climate change activists to describe humans as stewards of the earth, stewards of creation. Although theology probably contributed to the language, we will find in our reading that we are not stewards of anything. The language of stewardship separates humans from the rest of creation. Actually, the separation is more of an elevation of an elevating of human above creation, as if in our absence, creation will fail to look after itself. Today, in this very little time I have, I want to posit an imagery of the Moana as whanua, or the Moana as our mother. The bearing of the whanua as a common practice in the Pacific signifies the belief of being birthed out of the land. Our reading today states otherwise. Our birth is originated out of liquid. In the beginning was darkness, and it hovers upon the waters. From within darkness and liquid, life is birth. Land does not give birth to water, but rather the waters give birth to the land. When I see a volcanic eruption in the deep, I see a child coming to life from the darkness of Earth's core, which is liquid. Lava is poured forth, penetrating the density of the deep and surfacing in the Moana, where it cools off, providing an opportunity for the other elements of life, like various gases surrounding our atmosphere, to forge life. And with every eruption, the womb of Moana continues its life-giving cycle. Of course, with every eruption, many lives are lost, but in dying, they return to the womb. Why I'm giving you this picture today is because it is only in seeing Moana as a womb we will begin to lose the mentality that it is human stewardship that sustains the Moana. And then we girded our minds with awe and respect for the Moana as our mother, the womb from which we derive, the womb from which we originate. This will eventually give us a sense of duty and love for the Moana, knowing that it looks after us, not the other way around. We are but children. Ashes of volcanic eruptions can surface the Moana, and they can surface the Moana and begin life, and in another eruption disappear back into the Moana. No more. We turn to dust. With every pouring of waters from the vault, the skies, we return to the ocean, back to the womb from which we came. From the land where we are buried, we flow back to the Moana. You see, the Hebrews wrote the text we just read, understand the cycle of life, beginning their story with darkness and liquid. We do not belong to any land, nor do we own any. Both the land and us belongs to the Moana. We belong to the darkness. This is the colossal task before us as we talanoa, as we deliberate, I like the concept of Vaka Moana. It is so specific to me. I hope it will not become a commodity like the idea of Blue Pacific, which to some of our political leaders. I hope we see Moana as our mother, from whose womb we came. Love her, respect her, and revere her. For you will one day return to the darkness of the womb. And it is a true saying, if we do not respect her, she swallow us. Let us pray. Te tua o te langi, te tua o te moana. Te tua o mātou, te tua tutu, mai te sengata ki te sengata. God, from whose womb all things known and known came into being. As we gather virtually to chart the course of our journey in this past one, lead us, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Mary.
Beautiful reflection of ourselves as part and parcel of Moana, our origin and mother, and to which we eventually return. A fitting note to begin our Vaka Moana voyage. This is a journey in which your voice will inform what we can do together to achieve an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean, both in this ocean decade and beyond. There are already inspiring actions underway to protect and conserve our ocean, and yet we also know that our Blue Pacific faces many challenges and stresses. Here's a short video to remind us of how vital our connection to the Blue Pacific is, not only from our past, but from our future.
We want to be in fast cars, in fast boats, and everything's about speed, you know, earning as much money as quickly as possible, doing everything at pace. And I think what we've learned from COVID-19 is that we need to slow down. The whole planet needs to slow down, be at the pace of nature rather than at the pace of mankind.
During COVID-19, we have been locked down to travel from island to island. So we are not been able to have fuel from the shops. So we are just using boats. It really helped a lot, the canoe. It's very cheap. We don't have to spend anything on buying any fuel. For future development, we have to look back to the solution is from the ancient times. We have 6 canoes. We have 10 villages, so we decided to give it to villages that have marine protected areas to help the marine officers guarding the marine protected areas.
The project is about making canoes available for communities, but also providing the training that they need in order to understand how to sail again, and in particular the safety, because one of the issues we have in Fiji is safety at sea, and every year we have lots of fiberglass boats go missing, engines break down, fire out at sea, people lives lost. So the safety is very important for us, and again, that whole relationship with nature and learning when is a good time to sail, when's a good time to stay at home.
I think it is our real role to pass the skills or the knowledge that we have to our young ones. The kids are really interested in riding in these canoes, because it's totally different from the way they are traveling at the moment. Nowadays, they are using fiberglass boat with motor. They are going on further on with this kind of new technology of traveling. Hopefully that we will turn it opposite, turn the table around. Rather than using the engine or the outboard, people will prefer to use sailboat.
I think the kids are learning the sounds of nature again. And that's something that's been missing. The relationship with the ocean we've lost. So how can our youth be expected to care for the ocean if we don't have this relationship? Going back to traditional craft, as I spoke about earlier, is just building that relationship again with nature, with the ocean, and with everything in it, and learning to slow down and appreciate what's under the ocean. I have grandchildren now, so it's important that our grandchildren get to appreciate what we did when we were younger, and the way we remember it. The ocean that we grew up around.
With many thanks to Colin Phillip, PCOS, and the Pacific community for that video. We have many early career ocean professionals who are responding to this call to action and are working in their various fields for the betterment of the Pacific Ocean. Here is a message from Tyler Rachel of Fiji, a member of the Technical Advisory Board for the Pacific Youth Council and an early career ocean professional.
Hi, thank you, Mary, for that lovely introductions, and thank you to all the team and everyone behind the scenes that's making this work and having me on this forum. In the past few days, I was privileged enough to be part of the team that analyzed the Pacific Early Career Ocean Professional Survey that was launched on the 1st of June at the virtual Early Career Ocean Professionals Day. And with the interesting and inspiring solutions found, we also found that there lacked a wider Pacific response. And it has been decided that to extend the survey, and this is my call of action. We are first and foremost people of the ocean. Saltwater has sustained us for many generations. The ocean is who we are. It is our identity as Pacific peoples, as voyagers, traditional navigators, knowledge holders, protectors, divers, educators, dancers, poets, surfers, researchers, ocean scientists, biologists, data analysis, policymakers, and anyone else and content creators who are passionate about the ocean. We are all ocean professionals, and the ocean is not just a commodity. With the ongoing stresses from climate change to seabed mining, it is our duty as the future generation of the Pacific ocean leaders to stand up and take ownership of the ocean we need for the future we want through waves of change as Pacific early career ocean professionals. Under the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development for the next 10 years, there is a transformative and engaging aims and actions the decade would like to achieve. And the decade believes that the future generation plays an integral role in achieving the decade's legacy. Pacific Community of Ocean Science, PCOS for short, is housed at the SPC and plays a key role in the implementation of the UN Ocean Decade in the Pacific region. The ocean is an interconnected system. It does not operate in sectors or silos. PCOS wants to ensure that the science we provide to our members is integrated and easily accessible to help them make informed decisions and to protect and sustainably manage ocean resources. To do this, it means having diverse voices of ocean practitioners join us on our decade Vaka Moana, including the Pacific ECOPs across the region. In this context, this is the context in which PCOS is supporting the Pacific ECOPS Network Initiative. I believe that our uniqueness as ocean people, with our solidarity, our mana, and our ability to view our Pacific Ocean as more than just an industry's commodity, that we can be great decade advocates to share our knowledge and create networks with other ECOPs around the globe, becoming change makers, movers and shakers, and no longer working in silos, but as a great collective, learning our lessons from leaders, we can become the changing tide for the ocean we need for the future we want. So I call out to you, if you believe as I do, that we are grassrooted like mangroves, resilient and bold, holding traditional knowledge close to our hearts and transformative science and technology ahead of us, then let's be the changing tides our Pacific Ocean needs. You are a Pacific early career ocean professional, and it would be an honor and a great privilege to shape this space with you, because this to me is what an inspiring and engaging ocean looks like. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We are on our Vaka Moana. Now let's hear from one another. To facilitate our participation and our Talanoa discussion today, we welcome Crystal Griffiths and her colleagues from the Pacific Community's Strategy, Performance and Learning team.
Hello, everyone. What connects us here today is our ocean and our collective interest in preserving and protecting the ocean that we love and that looks after us. Before we hear the stories of our panelists today, there are some other important voices that we would like to hear from, and that's you, our participants, on your visions for the Pacific Ocean. In this next part of the voyage, we journey into the future together and imagine that we've already created the inspiring and engaging Blue Pacific that we want. Imagine it is the 8th of July, 2030. The ocean decade has come to an end. The future is bright, and what seemed impossible in 2021 is now possible. What is your experience of the Pacific Ocean? What does it look like and feel like to you? How did we get here? And what was your role in getting us here? Futures thinking is a method of informed reflection on the major changes that will occur in the next 10, 20 or more years in all areas of our social life. It is not about predicting the future, but rather critically considering different scenarios so that we can improve the quality of our decision-making to be more strategic and far-sighted. In the Pacific, futures thinking is informing the development of our 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, which builds on our shared stewardship of the Pacific Ocean and the shared connections that the people of the Pacific have with their natural resources, environment, cultures, and livelihoods. We at the Pacific Community are also using futures approaches to develop the next Pacific Community Strategic Plan, cognizant of the drivers of change that influence our vision, and recognizing the value of participatory methods in engaging all stakeholders to explore alternative futures together. One of the tools that we found useful in connecting with our stakeholders in discussions of the future is the Futures Triangle, and this is what we'd like to share with you today. The Futures Triangle is a simple foresight tool that is used to identify the plausible and likely futures that emerge between three pushing and pulling corners. It's quick to use, can be used anywhere, and with access to few resources. It's a tool that we've used at the community level, in face-to-face workshops, and in online collaborations such as this one. The Futures Triangle consists of three components. At the top, we state our preferred vision of the future. In determining this vision, we try not to limit ourselves by what we know today, but we rather ask ourselves, if there were no constraints, what would be my ideal vision for the future? On the left-hand side, we look at the pulls of the present. What are the trends and technologies that are changing the future right now? What are the tides of change that are pushing us forward? On the right-hand side, we explore the weights. What's holding us back or getting in our way? What are the deep structures that resist change? Here, we can also explore our anchors, the things that ground us. For example, our connections to the past and our identity that we want to hold on to. The combination of these three sides help us determine a plausible or likely future. So what we're going to do now is to create our own Futures Triangle. I'll ask you all now to log on to Slido and enter the same event code, VACA21. Or click on the link that we'll provide in the chat and answer these three questions. Looking forward to 2030, what does an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean look like to you? What are some of the waves of change that are pushing us closer towards this vision? And what are some of the weights holding us back from moving us forward? Or what are some of those things that we'd like to hold on to from our past? You can have multiple responses to each question. You're welcome to answer all questions, but if for some reason you can't respond to all, that's okay. And remember, there's no wrong answers. We'll keep the survey open for the first half of the panel discussion, so please feel free to edit and add more responses as you listen. We hope you enjoy the panel discussion from our inspiring Pacific panelists and look forward to sharing our completed Futures Triangle with you shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal and team. Thank you very much. And we look forward to hearing from everyone through the Slido platform. As we journey on, we invite you to reflect and engage with us as we talanoa with our panelists this afternoon. We are so privileged to be joined today by Professor Upolu Lumavai, who is Professor of Theology and Ethics and Principal of the Pacific Theological College in Fiji. As an Indigenous Pacific philosopher, he has published widely on how Pacific holistic Indigenous philosophies and spiritualities should underpin and inform development models and policies in relation to land, ocean, and peoples. We're also joined by Mia Kami, a student, performing artist, and climate change activist from the Kingdom of Tonga, who is soon to graduate in law and politics from the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. Mia is passionate about the importance of Indigenous knowledge, decolonizing the mind, and climate activism, and uses her music as a platform to shed light on issues relevant to her Pacific brothers and sisters. We also welcome Larry Rigetau, originally from Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia, who has been living on Guam since the COVID-19 pandemic struck last year. Larry is a former diplomat and a lifelong master navigator, and aside from teaching students at the University of Guam in navigating in the traditional way, he also connects with local youth to share his skills. We also say hello to Tekau Frere, who is a French Polynesian consultant working primarily with the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, OPOC, as an advisor on United Nations ocean processes. An avid ocean lover who enjoys kiteboarding, snorkeling, and paddleboarding, Tekau has worked with Pacific representatives at the UN to secure oceans priorities, such as a dedicated sustainable development goal on oceans, and brings experience as an advisor to the French Polynesian government in climate change, marine, and land use policies. We also have with us today Evelyn Ikelau Otto, who is a researcher with the Palau International Coral Reef Center, supporting its efforts to perform research, raise awareness, and find solutions to the struggles our ocean is suffering, from overfishing to plastic pollution to the effects of climate change and ocean acidification. And finally, we have Tangaloa Tele, Professor Peggy Fairbairn Dunlop, who is the Auckland University of Technology's inaugural foundation professor in Pacific Studies. Having lived and worked in New Zealand, Samoa, Fiji, Niue, and Tokelau, Tangaloa Tele has been teaching, researching, and publishing on Pacific development issues, including sustainable development, gender, and youth equity. And she now supports and mentors the next generation of Pacific researchers. I welcome and thank all our panelists for their time today. Recognizing that you each bring extremely unique perspectives in the areas of Pacific-led solutions, traditional knowledge and identity, as well as the role and participation of young people in an inspiring and engaging ocean, I'd like to ask you all as panelists if you could take a couple of sentences to describe your personal relationship with the ocean and tell us how the ocean factors into the work that you do. I'd like to perhaps start with Mia, followed by Ikelau and Tekau, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, everyone. I'd say that my relationship to the ocean, it started from a very young age, and I was very fortunate enough to live near the sea back in Tonga, where I'd go out with my grandfather and we'd fish there. And so for me, I just feel like the ocean has always been a part of my life. It's always been a part of who I am as a Tongan and how I identify as a Pacific Islander. So thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Ikelau? I believe you might need to unmute there.
Hello, thank you. Much like Mia, I grew up around the ocean. And so I like to say that the salt water runs through my veins. I grew up in Palau, avid swimmer, always out at the Rock Islands, always out fishing. So when I grew up, it was only natural that I decided to go into marine conservation. So I've returned back to Palau, and I'm a researcher here at the International Coral Reef Center. So the ocean is my daily work week. And then afterwards, after work, I go and I paddle and I'm back out onto the ocean doing recreational stuff. So I love the ocean and I'm a huge advocate for it. Thank you.
Naka Ikelau. And Tekau, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your relationship with the ocean?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yaurana. So like the previous panelist, I grew up about 100 meters from the ocean, and the waves cracking on the reefs have been my lullaby when I was a kid. And even now, I kind of need the waves to fall asleep. But weirdly, when I was growing up, the ocean was just there. I mean, I was spending a lot of time in it and next to it, but I never really thought about it as being that special. I was actually very scared of the ocean because I almost died by drowning when I was 5. I lived through a tsunami evacuation. I lived through storms like many other Pacific Islanders. So it was kind of a, I was a little bit afraid of the ocean, but it's when I left my home country, my home island, and I went abroad and I was more inland, that I started missing something. And that's when it hit me that actually, because I grew up next to the ocean, it was kind of part of who I was and my identity. And that's when I slowly evolved towards my current profession. And since I started working, I've been very closely involved on ocean matters.
Thank you, Tekau. As we can see, our panelists have a range of experiences or links with the ocean. Perhaps we might delve into what some of the pressing stresses or challenges are currently facing our ocean. And I'd like to explore this question with our Professors Upolu and Professor Fairbairn Dunlop, as well as Larry. Larry, perhaps would you like to begin to talk about, in your work and life, what are you seeing as some of the pressing stresses or challenges facing our Pacific Ocean?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Solowami. Maybe before I do that, I feel like I should at least pay my respect to the ocean in a traditional form, being a trained traditional navigator. The very first thing we always do when we voyage on this big blue Pacific Ocean is to recognize that, and as the pastor said earlier, it's our mother that cares for us, but we're also very afraid of it because it has absolutely no regards of how we feel as voyagers. It can at any moment devour us or shows us its beauty and its calmness at most times when we voyage. So please bear with me. I'll just do a very short chant that we as navigators do to pay our respect to the ocean. E madawani ge oro, e madawani go mare, e ya sugi, e ya busigi, medawe ai go. Ya dililongo lani metawi metawani ayolanga metawani gamara metawani getchu ga metawani gamor ga sa medabit nago bufene mei. So I am Larry Raigital, and I come from a very small, tiny island called Lamatrick. It's part of the Central Caroline Islands, now the Federated States of Micronesia. Lamatrick is part also of the state of Yap, one of 4 states that comprise the Federated States of Micronesia. As was said earlier, I'm now stranded on Guam as a COVID-19 refugee because I cannot go home since the FSM has closed its border over a year ago. I've taken also the opportunity while here at Guam to work at the University of Guam to teach young people about traditional navigation and the ocean. The chant that I had for you is called Sumitao. Sumitao is when we as navigators traverse on the ocean and realizing that it is vast and it is dangerous, that we pay our respect and also open the ocean for us. In some legends and some myths of our ancestors, we believe that our greatest navigators today are at the very bottom of the deepest part of the world, being the Marianas Trench. There was even histories and stories told of an island north of Yap that we call Sepin. Some of us also identified the island as Kafrur, where the people there some centuries ago decided that the best way they could preserve the culture was to sink their island down the depth of the ocean. In navigation, we still acknowledge the presence of our great navigators who are at the very bottom of this ocean, and we pay our respect to them. I've been a voyager for all of my life, really. Since I was 6, I began to be trained in the seafaring lifestyle from my fathers, uncles, and grandfathers, who themselves were also great seafarers and traverse around between the islands. And one thing that I noticed in those days, as growing up as a young boy and voyaging with them, was precisely that the ocean was beautiful, but also dangerous. And the ocean had a way of taking us from places to places when we needed to. And in my own observation, you know, we have these things that we identify them as sea marks. They're birds, they're ocean mammals, they're fish, drift logs that have been used for centuries to aid our navigation. And, you know, I've ran into some of those growing up. It's interesting that just last week I read about science discovering that whales sleep standing up in the ocean, and that in our ancestral navigation sea marks, our ancestors have also identified some of these creatures that stand up sleeping and named them, like legium is one of those that I know I want to see one day. I haven't, but it refers to a part of like 4 whales that are standing in the ocean. And as I read the science behind it, I'm like, whoa, interesting that science has now come around to confirm what our ancestors knew for thousands of years, and have also identified legium to be the whales that were standing and sleeping. But I think a more challenge to me now is the fact that we have indigenous knowledge of identifying voyaging times based on stars and based on formation of clouds. So we might call it as a voyaging calendar or star calendar, fighting stars that would dictate to us when we should voyage. Lately, that has been off. And, you know, there is more frequent storms and typhoons, and there is more things to be worried about in the ocean. Instead of us finding fish, we are now finding plastics. Instead of us finding turtles, we are now finding turtles that are being strangled by plastics. And so, I don't know, maybe the new thing for new navigators now is to figure out a way to also use sea marks of plastics that, or piles of plastics somewhere in the ocean that could help us to aid our navigation. Although I must say that the indigenous way of navigating has been something that stayed with us for over thousands of years, and it's something that we will continue to do in teaching the young people to appreciate, if anything, to appreciate the ocean. Because like I said, you know, it's beautiful. I grew up with it. But we were also always taught to respect it tremendously, only because that ocean has a way of devouring us any given point in time. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with the rest of the panelists to share a little of what I know in as far as what we do to protect the ocean. I know that these plastics don't just come around. There are people and there are big fishing fleets and boats. Oh, that's another thing we need to be careful about, is how many our canoes don't have satellites and don't have running lights. And so we run now the risk of running into some Chinese fishing boat in our ocean. It has happened sometimes. But I do know that there is more and more boats, fishing boats, and more container ship traversing this water. And maybe our canoes needs to be figure out some way of making sure it's safe. But anyways, those are something to be worked on by our leaders who talk about treaties of fishing rights in our zones and mining and all that. But we just hope that they could hear some of us at the grassroots the indigenous voices that speak to us about this ocean that is ours, that is us. And so thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Larry, for that reflection on the traditional knowledge passed down through millennia with great reverence, and the very real damages of the modern day sea marks, so to speak, in the form of plastic pollution and noise or traffic pollution. I'd like to give this time to Professor Vai, followed by Professor Fairbairn Bunlop, to share a little bit about what you believe some of the pressing stresses or challenges facing our Blue Moana are.
Thank you, Mary, and pleasant good afternoon to everyone who's attending. Mary was brought up next to the ocean as all other participants that we, and also our panelists. My life revolved around liquidity. My father was both a farmer and a fisherman. I am a fisherman as well. I hardly fish in Fiji, but in Samoa, where I come from, I used to do night diving fishing to help feed my family and my community. Now in the same part of the ocean where we used to fish, we need to go out to the deep to find big fish, as we no longer find fish in the lagoons as we normally do. Now there is stress on the ocean in relation to food security, human security, any other securities, you name it. But I think I'm particularly concerned, if we're talking about stresses, I'm particularly concerned that our development narrative is predominantly shaped and informed by Western philosophies and theologies. For example, philosophy of time, philosophy of human being, philosophy of economy. If you talk about philosophy of time, for example, there is that linear understanding of time that shapes our development narrative. If we talk about philosophy of the human person, it's mainly that individual person apart from the rest of the community. And if we talk about philosophy of economy, it's shaped by the philosophy of growth, where someone else or human being, the growth of a human being is emphasized at the expense of the growth of land and the oceans. This compartmentalized narrative, I think, is putting a lot of stress on our ocean, especially if that shapes our current development narrative. There was discussion with SBC to start reintroducing our philosophies of life, coming from a theologian and a philosopher myself, who has been engaged with ocean well-being for a very long time, eco-theology and eco-relational philosophies and spirituality. There was some discussion reintroducing our philosophies of life by using platforms such as the FESPEC to underpin and inform our leaders and those who work on development policies, and to enhance science and vice versa. I mean, we can talk about sustainable development and the ocean decade and how our people respond to ocean stresses. But if we do not critically analyze the ideological underpinnings of these stresses and the ideological underpinnings of our development narrative in relation to the ocean, and lay the indigenous life-affirming philosophical foundation that is holistic, contextual, homegrown, and is part of our people's everyday development in the grassroots communities, then an inspiring ocean is still a foreign imposed story set up to inspire someone else's story and someone else's economy. So there are many stresses, but I want stress to come from this point of looking at the underpinning factors, the underpinning stresses of stresses within the, our development narrative. Just to briefly note that because of time factor.
Thank you, Professor Upolu, for inviting us into a deep rethink of how we view stresses and challenges in the Blue Pacific. I now invite Professor Fairbairn Dunlop. I believe we might just need some assistance with unmuting your mic.
And thank you to the other panelists. And I'm just going to sort of similarly follow Professor Upolu and look really at what is the meaning of the sea to me in terms of people, the social systems related, the relationships which underpin our culture and identity, if you like, the mind, body, and soul, and our psyche, if you like. And I guess I would put myself in the category of my parents migrated to Samoa with 5 children, and 2 were born in New Zealand, and I am one of those. But as soon as they got to New Zealand and looked for a house, they got a house on a hill where they could look at the sea. And we still have that house on the hill where we can look at the sea. So that was, so then in about, when I was about 5, my mother took us 2 New Zealand borns back to Samoa to meet the relations and all the ainga back there. So how did we go? We went on the Mātua, and the journey, we stopped at Fiji and met all our relations there. We stopped at Tonga and met all our relations there. And then we arrived in Samoa. So again, it was a connecting relationships, social systems between all the people. And then we went back to New Zealand after about a year. And so now I'm going to skip right through to, in 1980, I returned with my husband to Samoa with 5 of our daughters. We have 5 daughters. And then we lived there for 25 years before returning to New Zealand, where I am now. So it's sort of a migration, return home migration story. But it was when we were living there that I saw the whole pattern of life of families and communities which is influenced by the sea. For example, every day there was a pattern of life with the sea involved. Let's start with Sunday. On Sunday was church, to'ona'i, family together, perhaps a rest, and then all down to the sea and games at the sea afterwards. Every Sunday that was, reaffirming relationships, enjoying the nature as well as the people, if you like, social and communal. If I move on a bit, school days, the girls went to school about 7 in the morning, came home, had a rest, and then every day we went to the sea, and everybody would be at the sea, diving, not championship swimmers, just enjoying each other and enjoying the sea. When I think of the sea in Samoa, it's also part of our whole material culture, if you like. We often talk about Samoa as being, the land in Samoa is being divided. It's already divided like a fish. And so it's a relationship between the communities as well. But also even in the fish is an example of, if you like, social rank and place. Not everybody eats all the fish. The top of the fish, the head of the fish goes to the ranking people, and it's divided that way. I think of the inati and the fishing in Tokelau, where whatever catch you get is divided amongst all the villages and all the families so that everybody has enough. And the second and overarching is you only take what you need, and that's for your family needs. So I just wanted to say that really because when we talk of the sea, we sort of talk about a grand narrative of sailors and identifying with the sea. I think in our discussions, we should also remember that the sea is the source and the basis of all our social systems, of our relationship with God, with the land, with each other, and with our nations, I guess. Yeah, whakatau.
Thank you, Professor, for continuing the thread in alignment with the sea being our source of origin, and to which we will return, of course. We will draw this first session of the panel discussion to a close, but I just want to preview that we will be discussing some of the exciting examples of progress, especially Pacific-led progress in protecting and conserving our oceans. That's happening in the international sphere, as well as in communities and in research happening on coral reefs. So before we disperse temporarily, I'd like to give a heads up to Tekau, to Mia, and to Ikilau. We'll be leading on your reflections on Pacific-led solutions and progress that are being made towards an inspiring and engaging ocean. But for now, we'll go back to take a look at our futures triangle. But before we do that, I'd like to invite us all to reflect on a piece of poetry that we have contributed by a poet of the Marshall Islands. Well known to us as Kathy Jetnil Kitchener, and we invite you to reflect with us through this poem of hers titled Anointed by Kathy Jetnil Kitchener, writer, poet, performer, and educator of the Republic of the Marshall Islands.
I'm coming to meet you. I'm coming to see you. What stories will I find? Will I find an island or a tomb? To get to this tomb, take a canoe. Take a canoe through miles of scattered sun. Swallow endless, swirling sea. Gulp down radioactive lagoon. Do not bring flowers or speeches. There will be no white stones to scatter along this grave. There will be no songs to sing. How shall we remember you? You were a whole island once. You were breadfruit trees, heavy with green globes of fruit, whispering promises of massive canoes. Crabs dusted with white sand scuttled through pandanus roots. Beneath looming coconut trees, beds of watermelons slept still, swollen with juice. And you were protected by powerful Iroij chiefs birthed from women who could swim pregnant for miles beneath a full moon. Then you became testing ground. 9 nuclear weapons consumed you, one by one, engulfed in an inferno of blazing heat. You became crater, an empty belly. Plutonium ground into a concrete slurry filled your hollow caverns. You became tomb. You became concrete shell. You became solidified history. Immovable, unforgettable. You were a whole island once. Who remembers you beyond your death? Who would have us forget that you were once green globes of fruit, pandanus roots, and whispers of canoes? Who knows the stories of the life you led before? Here is a story of a turtle goddess. She gifted one of her sons, Ledau, a piece of her shell anointed with power. A leathery green fragment, hollow as a piece of bark. It gave Ledau the power to transform into anything, into houses and trees, the shapes of other men, even kindling for the first fire. He almost burned us alive. I am looking for more stories. I look and I look. There must be more to this than incinerated trees, a cracked dome, a rising sea, a leaking nuclear waste with no fence. There must be more to this than a concrete shell that houses death. Here's the story of another shell, anointed with power. Ledau used it to transform into kindling for the first fire. He gave this fire to a small boy. The boy almost burned his entire village to the ground. Licks of fire leapt from skin and bones, from strands of coconut leaves. While the boy cried, Ledau laughed and laughed. This is a story of a people on fire. We pretend it is not burning all of us. Here is the story of the ways we've been tricked, the lies we've been fed. It's not poisonous anymore. Your illnesses are normal. You're fine. You're fine. My belly is a crater empty of stories and answers. Only questions, hard as concrete. Who gave them this power? Who anointed them with the power to burn?
We thank Kathy Jetnil-Kitchener for her contribution today. We now invite Crystal and team to show us how our Futures Triangle is taking shape with our audience contributions. And we'll introduce you to Backcasting, thanks to Mema Mochosana, SPC's Youth and Social Inclusion Advisor.
Thank you, Mary. So now comes the time to share our Futures Triangle with you, which, as you can see, has been enriched with your many and important contributions. I won't read them all, but I'll take a short moment now just to highlight a few of the examples that you've provided in this very short time. For the visions up the top, of which there are many, I'll read one. An ocean of strength in diversity, strength in giving everyone a voice, strength in ensuring that flora and thrive, and strength in preservation of ocean traditions. Another one in the visions, more ownership by Pacific people and more Pacific people in decision-making places where the Pacific Ocean is being discussed. More youth involvement is what would make the Pacific Ocean inspiring and engaging, in my opinion. We move now to the right-hand side at the bottom of our weights and our anchors of the past, that which you see there in purple. A lack of coordination between stakeholders, uncoordinated use of ocean space by multiple users. A focus on economic growth rather than on well-being, geopolitics, and climate change. For the pools of the present in green on the left, citizen science and increasing digital connectedness, regional cooperation, and integrated ocean governance approach. Also, again, as with one of our themes of today, the youth movement and the passion of Pacific people to be custodians of the ocean and managing it for their livelihoods and natural resource outcomes. Another one that I'll highlight is the voyaging arts, the memory of past paths and above, the slow down movement. The ocean is the way. We'll share with you this Futures Triangle that is being created as we speak, and you can continue to contribute to it. We'll share it with you in the chat as well, so you can take it with you. And I invite you to take with you as well the different perspectives that have been offered and to respect all of the contributions that have made today. I will now invite my colleague Mema to introduce the second part of this futures exercise, which is the backcasting. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal, for the introduction, and thank you for facilitating the futures thinking section of our voyage. Fatalo fatul pa ia o tātou au wa alneo uli tupu matamali au ngawhapai matupulanga talawolo tātou fulau fatasi. Good afternoon, warm greetings and talofa lava to all of you who are voyaging with us on our Vaka Moana. As my colleague Crystal introduced, I'm Mema Mutsanga and I'm going to paddle our Vaka through this part of our voyage. Welcome on board once again. I will try my best to ensure that we get through this part of the Moana safely. So we now have a preferred vision of the future. Now, how do we make the vision real? This is where backcasting can be helpful. On this point, I want to share with you the Samoan scenario of the Folaunga or voyage. The Samoan concept and art of voyage starts on land. It includes preparing the boat, the tools needed for the voyage, the house to shelter the boat upon return, and most importantly, it includes the prayerful support of our community members. Before the voyage, the captain will instruct the crew members to put everything in the boat as they will be disconnected from their anger, and they are not sure what will happen along or during the voyage, hence the saying, "Tā pena mea umai le waa, o la tātou mutu mal taula, e lei loa tanga e whai le vasa." Every voyage is accompanied by prayerful support of our community leaders who will congregate in the whalewaa or boathouse, uplifting the voyage in prayers, hence the Samoan saying, "O whai vai tapua ia, o whai vanai umalimanuia." A voyage or journey that is uplifted in prayers is a successful journey. The Samoans believed that the success of the voyage is backcasted to the on-land preparation and the tapuainga or prayerful support of their elders in the whalewaa. Backcasting is sort of reverse strategic planning. Backcasting involves imagining that we've already created our desired future. For example, the exercise that we've just did. And then look back to see what the steps would be or are required to get there. It works on the premise that by starting with our own preferred vision, we are not limited by the structures and trends of today and can move beyond the incremental improvement mindset to introduce more imaginative new ideas or opening up the dialogue to a future we can create. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to reflect on the visions in the futures triangle that we have created and working backward from the vision. Name the key elements, key events, trends, and actions that took place over the past 10 years to achieve our vision. I will ask you to return to Slido using your phone or computer. Enter the event code Vaka 21 or click on the link provided in the chat. Imagine it's 2030. Looking back, what were the transformative actions, trends, or events that took place that were critical to achieving our preferred vision? Remember to also include the date. Again, we'll keep the survey open for the first half of the panel discussion, and you are more than welcome to provide multiple responses. We'll now move back to the panel discussion and look forward to sharing our collective backcasting in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mema and team, for that introduction to backcasting, and we certainly look forward to our audience continuing to make their contributions through Slido. We now return to our panel discussion, and while I invite all panelists, of course, to include their reflections on some of what Mema and her team have shared with us, I now take us to Te Kau, to Ikilau, and to Mia on sharing with us what are some of the events or activities happening now or recently that are making an inspiring and engaging ocean possible in the Pacific. and what would you like to share? Starting with you, Tekau.
Thank you very much, Mere, for giving me the floor. There are actually, apologize, my cat is playing up. There are many inspiring events that are happening in the region, but also on the international scene, and many of these events and processes were actually or are led by the Pacific. As the Pacific Ocean Commissioner mentioned in his statement. So one of the first way that we can really have an inspiring ocean is by maintaining the stability of our borders. Why? Because we need to be able to preserve it, to respect it and care for it, and we cannot do it if it's not quote unquote ours. And so the Pacific is actually leading on that issue at the international level by contributing to the development of international law. A second important process that is happening relates to the conservation of biodiversity outside of our borders, so in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Currently, the way international ocean governance is conducted and the way international law is provided doesn't necessarily provide for a coherent approach to the conservation and management of biodiversity. And so the international community has been engaged for over a decade, actually since the mid-2000s, on a process called BBNJ. It's biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And the objective is really to have an international legally binding agreement to allow for more effective conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And the negotiations which were supposed to be concluded in 2020 and are now postponed because of COVID, and hopefully will conclude in 2022, cover both the aspect of conservation of biodiversity, so maintaining what is already healthy, but also allowing for sustainable use of biodiversity, including to allow countries such as those of the Pacific to benefit from the sustainable use of biodiversity. And so the negotiations are considering different type of tools. So they're looking into benefit sharing from the utilization of marine genetic resources as we see the development of biotechnology increasing, and providing countries like the Pacific who don't necessarily have access to the capacity, to the technology, to be able to benefit from access and the utilization of those marine genetic resources. They're also thinking of what type of area-based management tools can we put in areas beyond national jurisdiction to allow for those healthy ecosystems to remain healthy, and for those who are not that healthy, maybe to restore them and improve their resilience to global stresses such as climate change, pollution, and all the cumulative impacts for all the different activities from human activities. And talking about human activities, the development of activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction is also an issue because perhaps one activity alone will not be that impactful, but if you take them all together, they could have significant impact. And so the instrument is also looking at establishing an international environmental impact assessment regime for areas beyond national jurisdiction, and maybe also looking into strategic environmental assessments to look at a more broader sectorial approach or a regional based approach on impact assessment. But of course, we won't be able to achieve conservation or sustainable use if we don't have the resources. And for countries like the Pacific, we need capacity, we need to have funding, we need to have technology. And so the the negotiations are also discussing that. And in those negotiations and process, the Pacific and Pacific SIDS in particular have been very active and have pushed for a lot of very important issues, including the recognition of the role of traditional knowledge and its holders as a complement to Western science. And thanks to the Pacific, actually, it's now becoming, I would say, almost normal to just say science and traditional knowledge together. So that's a big achievement from the Pacific. And I know we were running out of time, but I cannot not talk about SDG 14, the Sustainable Development Goal 14, especially since I'm on a panel with the daughter of a late ambassador at the UN, who was very also instrumental in securing SDG 14. Today, we wouldn't be, in my view, we wouldn't be talking as much about ocean on sustainable development and other processes if it was not for the Pacific and Pacific Islands in particular. It all started at Rio +20 when the Pacific and Nauru, was of the Alliance of Small Island States, decided to fight for the recognition of ocean as an important element in sustainable development. They gained that at Rio +20 and decided then to have a dedicated dedicated goal on ocean for the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It was not an easy thing to do. Actually, at the beginning, everybody was against them, but they hung on and they fought and they did it the Pacific way. And now we have an ocean goal, and we're talking about ocean in many different processes. And so this is, for me, and it should also be for all of the Pacific, old and young aside, an illustration that when the Pacific wants something, they can achieve it.
Thank you so much, Tekao, for highlighting some tremendous milestones and achievements led by the Pacific as a trailblazer. I now give the floor to Ikilau, if you would like to share some of the exciting events or activities that are happening in terms of Pacific-led solutions.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you for that, Tekao, sorry. Yeah, so when I was giving these questions, I was kind of thinking at the local level. Well, one of the things that's happening regionally is we're currently on our way to our Oceans Conference. That's hopefully going to be next year, 2022. And this is a yearly thing that everybody comes together, and the Pacific Islands can speak out to the larger countries and hold people accountable. And then this brings us back to the youth. So our youth, by engaging with them and teaching them the importance of the ocean with all of these different activities that we do in the islands. I know specifically here in Palau, we work with the elementary schools and high schools to kind of engage them and encourage them to embrace what's around them and encourage them to, whatever they do, protect it wherever they're going, and stand up for the Pacific ways and our way of lifestyle. And so this brings us into a segue of our Oceans Conference being able to stand up for ourselves, even if we're a small country, much like what happened at the UN. You know, we may be small, but we have a loud voice, and together, if we all come together, we can make something happen. And I think this is the inspiring and the engaging part of the ocean, where we do this because it's instilled in us, and it's instilled in our blood, and the love for our land and the love for our ocean, that we can stand proud and stand together and make a lot of changes, and show that, you know, we may not be the contributors of these issues such as plastics in the ocean, but they are affecting us, and we're going to do something about it. And so, yeah, that's kind of my perspective of it.
Thank you so much, Ikilau. And I think that brings us into a great segue to hear from Mia on your reflections about what's happening in terms of Pacific-led or young people-led spaces to take us towards an inspiring and engaging ocean.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I think for me, the way that I would answer this question as a student that has yet to kind of engage in this kind of discourse at like an institutional level, I'm kind of going to speak more on how I've seen ocean activism as a student, and currently as I'm currently the co-coordinator at 350 Fiji. And last year we were able to host a series of talanoas in a week where we called it Velomani Week, which means togetherness. And these talanoas were centered around different ways that young people could engage with nature and reconnecting with who we are as Pacific people and building that connection to nature. And so these talanoas we had a talanoa on traditional voyages, and it largely discussed our connections to the ocean. And what I feel that I've noticed is that I feel like a lot of what's made a really big difference these days, as Tekau had mentioned, is the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in these solutions. And something that I feel that's coming up slowly that we had kind of lost along the way was the aspect of respect. Our Pacific cultures are so big on respect, and respect in every aspect, whether it's relationships, whether it's family, and in this sense, it's our oceans and how we take care of it and how we nurture. And so there was something that the Reverend had said where he had described the ocean as beautiful and dangerous. And I think that's a very strong description that we can use on our Pacific people as well. We're beautiful in the sense that we're culturally diverse and we have this amazing ocean that provides for us that we can help protect, but then we're also dangerous in the sense that we're also powerful. Our solutions exist in our ancestors' knowledge on how to take care of the ocean. And so I guess the way that I would interpret it and how I would put it is that these solutions have so much potential to be more powerful because these solutions have existed before in our culture, in our tradition, and in our ancestry. So that's how I would have answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. And in speaking of our ancestry and in threads of the contributions that the panelists and speakers have made today, traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge comes through quite valuably. I'd love to hear from Larry and Professors Vi and Fairbairn Dunlop on traditional knowledge and science, often being viewed as separate entities or ranked as one being better than or preferable than the other. I'd ask you to share with us what are some of your reflections on how traditional knowledge factors into an inspiring and engaging ocean. And can we begin?
We didn't hear the last part of your talk, Mary, sorry.
Happy to repeat. Just as mentioned, traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge has been raised as something that's incredibly valuable, not only for our present day, but in terms of how we move forward towards an inspiring and engaging ocean. And perhaps traditional knowledge is wrongly perceived as being a separate entity from science or traditional science as we know it. What would be some of your reflections on how traditional knowledge factors into an inspiring and engaging ocean? Would you like to share some reflections on that, Larry?
Thank you, Mary, for giving me the mic once again. From my own experience, one of the things that I recall very vividly as a way, quickest way to take care of you being seasickness, when you're seasickness as a young boy growing up and starting my first attempt to get on a canoe. The quickest medicine was always that when a child was getting seasick, that an elder would sneak up from behind and pick him up and throw him in the ocean. And I was thrown in the ocean several times myself, so that I could become the ocean. And from there, I don't get seasickness anymore. I know that there is medicine now for motion sickness, but in those days, the quickest way was to be it, to be the ocean, be thrown in there, and eventually you will never get seasick anymore. I spoke about some of the things that ancestral knowledge taught us about seafaring, and I'd like to think that all of it is all deeply rooted on that concept that we've all kind of talked about, that of fundamental respect for the environment, the land, the ocean, and everything else that is in between. In my culture, there are two occasions in life that the whole island community comes together to celebrate. One being the day I was born, and the whole community would fish for 4 days to feed the community. Unfortunately, I was never able to participate, even though the ceremony and was all for me. And the second one would be the day I die. The community would once again come again to feast, and again, I will not be able to participate. But those two events are important because for us, it gives us the recognition that whatever happens in between is what you make it to be. And for us, it's all about caring for the land that provides so little meager resources for us, and also for the ocean that we all depend heavily on. I think indigenous knowledge in seafaring and everything else that we do on the small Pacific islands that we all come from have taught us to live life the best that we know how. And we've survived on these islands for thousands of years. People have now, science has now come around the complete circle to teach us about sustainability. Well, I think that the whole concept of sustainability and even ocean management all existed long before the UN and everybody else started bringing up on the platform, because the ancestors knew it. They knew that the phases of the moon impact how the fish behave, impact how the breadfruit and the food on the land produce. And so these are indigenous science that, to me, I'm finding it interesting to see the modern science confirming some of the things that our ancestors knew all along. You know, I have had many opportunities to work in canoe carving, for example, where my father would be using his body as a form of measurement to use coconut leaf to measure out stuff to carve that canoe. Well, I would show him how my teacher in mathematics, maybe in some form of formula that I can derive from getting a triangle that would come out with we reached the same conclusion. Both my father, my late father, and I would reach, he applied indigenous, I applied modern, but we both reached the same conclusion. So he was fascinated with the speed that I'm able to derive that conclusion, but I was more fascinated with the indigenous way of him reaching that same conclusion. To the point where my father would basically tell me, well, you know, in order for you to get from A to C, you've figure out a way to use that calculator to get you direct A to C. And so I said, well, that's faster. But to him, he said, but you've missed B. You know, you've entirely missed that point of B where you need to stop to get to C. And it never dawned on me until now that I realized, like, I think most of us have come to use the quickest way of going from one place to other without the indigenous protocols that existed. You will miss a lot in between A and C if you don't use the indigenous formula of getting you from point to point to point. And I see that the younger generations are very fascinated with technology and pressing the button on the iPhone or whatever. and the games that have kind of pollute the minds of the young people. But we try to teach them that inside that instrument, there are ways that are taking away the functionality of your brain. But in the ancestral way, you take it step by step from A, B, and C. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Larry. I invite Professor Polo, if you would like to add anything to these reflections before we then go to Professor Fairbairn Dunlop.
The principle of life that underpins how, many of us Pacific Islanders view and understand the world is relationality. As Tangaloatele referred to centrality of relationship. In the beginning was relationship. We were born into relationships. We came into being through relationships with this cosmic whole constituted of the humans, the whanua, moana, and so forth. Therefore, we did not create relationships. We only continue these relationships. So therefore, thus, we are not, and we are never the center of the story. Life for all is at the center of the story. This centrality of life for all is not only indigenous and Pacific, it is also very biblical and Christian. And I believe it's also found in many other religions. And because of relationality, life is always fluid, always evolving, progressive. It is never rigid and fixed. Now, this takes me to stewardship, Mele, if you want me to, because this is fundamental to what we are talking about today. We normally borrow from the Eurocentric philosophy of stewardship, which is about caring and looking after the land and the ocean. The question that I have is that how can we care and look after the ocean if we are not deeply connected to it? This narrative continues to give more power to the corporations and to the culture of greed to push development models and policies that look like they're helping, conserving, and caring for the ocean, but they are actually using the same narrative to justify extracting from the ocean. They call it sustainable resource extraction. This is still a human-centric model of stewardship that always, promote the we have economic paradigm based on a Western idea of growth that I referred to before. We need, and that is my personal opinion, and I think, to shift back to the kinship model of stewardship that has been there in our islands for centuries, where we see everything, including the ocean, as part of our kinship lineage. The ocean as kin, our flesh, bones, and blood, tino, toto, ma'ano, as we say in Samoa. So it means that therefore the universe is in us. This is something the current mainstream dominant development narrative never gets right, because they always think of the universe outside of us. That is why in many Pacific languages, we have parts of the human body named after the land and the ocean. So for example, perhaps I'm a bit too ignorant to bring my Samoan culture here, but I can't help it because it's the only perspective that is alive to me, because I grew up in that perspective. To name a few, for example, where I come from, the word for soil, palapala, is the same word for blood. The word for land, whanua, is the same word for the placenta. That whanua, that placenta, once the mother gives birth, is buried in the wider whanua, or the land, to seal the kinship lineage. The word for human skull, atingisami, literally means seashell, indicating that that head of yours comes from the ocean. It is not just a seat of knowledge or a case for mental capacity, but also a relationship. If this is the case, then it invites an oceanizing of knowledge. Let me give another example, again, from my culture. The social structure of Samoa is structured around the saying, "Olei aivivia," the bony fish, which means that the structure of the Samoan society should not be centered on one bone of the fish. The human being is one bone of the fish, but perhaps also a bony fish. The land is a bony fish because it's so complex. The ocean is a bony fish. All bones of the fish represent the multidimensionality of our social structure. Well, from my own personal opinion, that it's sad what is now happening in Samoa, where some bones are trying to control the movement of the whole fish. But I'm always fascinated by the Itauke totetism, if I want to come to Fiji, of each person having a fish representing the ocean, a tree representing the land, and a bird representing the skies. An ideal framework and model to reframe development from a holistic cultural perspective. I think that most, if not all, cultures have this holistic narrative. In other words, traditional knowledge comes with a relationship. It's sad that the education system is not really teaching these deep connections in their curriculum. And if they do, it's perhaps only about understanding the language, but not the philosophy and the values behind that language. So to sum up, Mere, it is until we are deeply connected to the ocean or to the land that we can really take care of it. You cannot honestly take care and die for something that you're not deeply connected to, that you cannot feel it's part of you. The ocean never lies. It will give signs and warnings of our destructive behavior from time to time. The kinship model of stewardship promotes the we are rather than the we have. Quantum science has confirmed this interconnected we are structure of life for us. It is within this framework of we are that the idea of growth should be understood. Growth is measured by life for all, including the ocean, not just for some. So the ocean's growth is our growth. In a we are culture, our self-denial is the fulfillment of the ocean. Our values of tauhiwa or vewekani or fa'aloalo, for example, are critical to ocean growth. And when we capture this relationality, there is no such thing as us versus them, science versus traditional knowledge, or God versus the world, or church versus society. We are structured holistically where my own strand of the mat cannot become beautiful until there's another strand of the mat lying next to me. The Pacific churches have embarked on a new story since 2017 of the Pacific, a story that is called the Pacific Household of God, to complement the Pacific Leaders Blue Pacific Initiative. The idea is rethinking the Pacific household in the light of our relational values and principles and philosophies and spiritualities that are life-affirming, that promotes life for all within the household, not just for one. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Professor Polo. You've dismantled and affirmed so much this afternoon. I now invite Tanloa Tele, Professor Fairbairn Dunlop.
Yeah, Fafatai, and building on everything which has been said, I think, and going forward, I think this is a real strong time for us to be going forward, and particularly with youth voice. I think if I think of my generation, most probably, not me, my generation very much on economic growth models rather than sustainability, on exploitation of what we have rather than sharing. But also overarching all, I think there's always been a devaluing of our own knowledges in the light of Palangi knowledge and ideals. And I think with our youth today coming forward, they are much more informed than we were. They are very articulate and they're changing this mindset of our reliance on overseas ideas. And they are willing to interrogate the systems. But to get back to going forward, and very much with youth, may I just very quickly then bring back to what UNESCO has been doing in New Zealand to forward the decade as the lead agency in New Zealand, combining both NGOs, communities, legal entities, as well as donors. It's a real bringing together. And I think in the past, my experience is that UNESCO has had 4 programs that almost operate in silos. There's education, culture, social, and what's the next one? And natural resources. But in taking the lead in this UNESCO Transformative Ocean Science project or program, which for sustainability, development, lives and well-being, it's weaving together, as has been said by every panelist now and in your comments, is weaving together the knowledge that we have plus the scientific knowledge. And I always call our knowledge scientific as well. I don't like calling it traditional and indigenous. I say that is our scientific knowledge, our science, bringing it together to create new knowledges and choices for going forwards, rather than what donor agencies say we should be doing, because bottom line is we are very, or have been, reliant on donor agencies. So what I want to say about this UNESCO organised program, which has the lead for Pacific and, for New Zealand and the Pacific, there is a reference group which comprises scientists, traditional navigators from the Pacific and from New Zealand, and also communicators of scientific knowledge. It's a very high-powered group. So that's number 1. We are all talking to each other. Number 2, there is a website. That is the reference group, which meets regularly. There is a website which is called Te Tini o Tangaroa, the multitudes of Tangaroa. And I invite you to go onto that website and have a look at the way that it is portraying all the, I'll read it, learn about diverse New Zealand ocean science spanning from the Pacific through New Zealand and the Southern Ocean to Antarctica. Learn how scientists, Māori and other ocean knowledge holders are protecting and enhancing Aotearoa New Zealand's marine environments. And so on there, we are listing, or UNESCO is listing, the projects and the technology and the values and both the weaving together the customary knowledge that we know and also the scientific knowledge and consideration of both. That Te Tini o Tangaroa is available and projects are being added to it, and anyone in the Pacific or globally can add projects to that page to share our knowledge right across dimensions of knowledge construction. And also it's on Facebook. So once again, it's not confined, the knowledge building we're talking about, the co-creation of knowledge, if you like, it's not just confined to the academic sphere or the practitioners who are in the field. It's available to everybody online and Facebook. And so that's the sort of program we need, available to everybody to access and explore and refine and use and challenge. But more particularly, I'm going to come right back to the first point about youth going forward, that's where our future, they're the hopes for our future. You know, that is it Michael Jackson's song, children are our future. But they are articulate, they are forceful. For too long, youth voice has not been heard in Pacific decision-making processes, whether at the community or at the global level or at the national level. But they are a force to be reckoned with and actually our hope. And that's the way for us to go forward, sharing our knowledge, but also opening up our knowledge to critique and refinement. Yeah, whakatei.
Thank you so much, Whangalotele. And for those of you who are curious about this repository of knowledge, you can see the link there in the chat. And please do engage with it and visit it. Speaking of a force to be reckoned with, I'd love to hear from the young at heart members of our panel in acknowledging the Pacific as a young region, a region full of resourceful, creative and vibrant people. And I'd love to hear from you, Mia, as well as you, Ikilau, in talking about the community activities that you're undertaking, and welcome members of the panel to join in as well. In response to the question, where do you see young people playing a role in an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean? And how can young people be supported to reach their full potential this ocean decade and beyond? What are your thoughts, Mia?
That's a really good question. And I've heard this question before, and it's always a very difficult one to answer because it's always strange to kind of ask people, like young people, like, oh, what are you guys, how are you guys going to fix the future, you know? But I feel like a big part, like as I had mentioned, a big part of moving forward as for the youth and as young people is we have to look into our own cultures and the existing values that are there in who we are and who we identify as. And so for me, like something that is a value for me, or a value that comes up for Tongans, as a Tongan, is the value of respect. And again, as I had said, like that has to be applied to how we treat our ocean, how we treat our land, our people. And so I feel like there needs to be a connection between young people and our resources and nature. And as Mr. Upolu had said, he had talked about how we have to be connected to the things that we want to protect. And so I feel that plays a really big part in how we can move forward. But I also do feel that this kind of connection for people that are kind of like surrounded by nature all the time, that's also a privilege that a lot of us don't have. Young people don't have as much because the reality is we're in a constantly globalizing, modernizing world. And so it's really hard to establish these connections. But what's important is that there needs to be effort. You know, we can't just sit around and wait for people to come to us. I think it's also important for us to do our part. And I must admit, I'm also guilty of that too. Like I like to speak on environmental issues, but I'm normally in my room. So I think that just kind of reflects on how our connection to nature, we have to make the effort. And we have to recognize as well that it's also a really big privilege to be as engaged as a lot of people are. And so, yeah, I think I'll just end on that note. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mia. Ikilau.
Thank you for that. Yeah, well, we do like to say that, well, the youth are our future. So where do I see them playing a role in inspiring and engaging the Pacific Ocean? One of the things, like I think Mia kind of mentioned it, is they don't have access right now. You know, we have the privilege of being around the ocean. Not many people do. And that's kind of because of modernization. And I think that modernization is just the trend that's happening now with our youth. And the environment is all around us. So they're more tied up in the gadgets and connecting via social, like Facebook and Instagram and all of these social platforms, that they forget to step outside. One of the things that we do here at the center, and it's really surprising to me, is that we here at Pickwick, you know, we do a lot of research, but one of our biggest things is conservation is for the people. And so they need to understand what we're doing and try and merge science and tradition and science and culture together. So, because, you know, all of our conservation efforts are for nothing if we don't have the support of our community. So a lot of that is giving back to the community and letting them know what we're doing and why we're doing all of these things. And so we invite the youth over to take part in some of our research. They come and intern. They do practicums, so like high school jobs in the afternoon, kind of get an idea of what the work life is and, you know, if this might be a field of interest. And it's really surprising when they come, they have this, they put science up on a platform and conservation up on a platform that it's might not be attainable to them, so they don't entertain the idea of it. But then they come to the center and we teach them ways on how we do studies, what's out in the ocean, and their minds are blown away. And then from that, they go back to school and then they rethink what they want to do with their lives. They rethink about what options there are and kind of their view on our environment. And then they start to get involved in all of these activities surrounding the ocean, surrounding, you know, the land. One of the biggest, and in addition, possibly the loss of our culture. That's because, like Mia said, one of the biggest things in our culture is respect. And that's taught to us at a young age. Respect our elders, respect our family, respect the land, respect the ocean. And so trying to connect tradition, connect our culture with science, and give that to the youth, showing them that it's not a hard field to be in. It's quite easy. All you need to do is have the passion for it, and passion will take you a long way from there. So I feel like what they need is just the adults to be supportive and encouraging and provide them opportunities. And basically, a lot of the issues that I find is that when we communicate to the youth, we don't communicate it in a way that they understand it. And if we were able to do that as adults, we would be able to bring them up higher and be able to do more for us and more for themselves, because this is for the future and this is for them in the long run. So I think the youth have a huge role to play, as well as the adults of this generation, us right now, grooming the youth. We have a responsibility to them to make sure that they understand what they're going into and understand our efforts on trying to make it a better place for them, and understand that they have a role to do to get to this vision of 2030 that we're seeing as well.
Thank you so much, Ikilau. Tekau has asked to provide some closing statements before we wrap up the incredibly rich, incredibly inspiring, and I know the audience agrees through the chat box discussions that we Tekau, the floor is yours.
Vinaka Mere, it's not closing statement. It was just to contribute to these very important questions, and I'm very impressed by the three young women that intervened today. So both Mia, Ikilau, but also Tyler earlier on, and it's very inspiring to me as a. I'd like to say that I'm young, but I'm not that young, obviously. But it's great to see that we have young people who are aware that they need to play an important role, and that role needs to be anchored in the traditional values and the core values of our region in terms of respect. And I think it's important that the message be that our young people obviously will have to play a role and need to do it now, and that as we develop and we develop a Pacific way of development in a way, or a pacific way, or reconciling ourselves with the ocean, we do that by taking the best of our traditions, taking the best of the modern life, taking the best of our region and our differences in our region, but also taking the best from outside so that we can develop something that actually makes sense and can help us fight and apprehend the huge challenges that we have before us. And so I just wanted to say that I'm very impressed by both of you. And I think that our generation and our parents or the elders can help support you by investing in scholarship, etc., so that we build a new generation that is highly skilled, that is smart, knowledgeable, and can really get us where we need to be in 2030 and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Tekau. And before I wrap up our discussion for today, I hand the floor over to Larry for some reflections of his own.
Thank you, Mary, for giving me the mic once again. No, just two things. As we're talking about youth and my own experience with the youth that I'm working with, I see that, you know, there is a really need for them to, and I think it's been spoken many times by Professor Upolu about this relationship. They need to connect with the ocean and the environment. How we do that, maybe I've always think that we're very blessed to have all this beautiful ocean and the beautiful lands that we're surrounded with. We need to make it as our classroom. We need to get out of the four corners of the wall and teach our young people that the classroom is the land, is the ocean, because in seafaring, that is the classroom. They teach you, one of the very first thing that we're taught in navigation is that before, when you go on a voyage, before you lose sight of the land of origin, you have to take a good look at where that island is, because obviously it's going to move depending on how the current is drifting you. And in order for you to look back, I mean, to gauge, to have the course, determine the course for your land of destination, you ought to look back. You must identify where your origin is. You need to know who you are, where you come from, in order for you to know where you're going. As navigators, that's very essential. Step one, when we do voyaging, is that you got to look back. That's a metaphor I like to teach the young people. Know who you are. And you're very blessed. You're very rich with all the surrounding resources. Maybe instead of sitting in the corners of four walls, let's teach our young kids to appreciate the nature that they have and learn from it. It has a lot to teach us. I don't know, maybe we need to throw more children into the ocean to be the ocean than let it be.
Thank you so much, Larry. Certainly a need for throwing into the ocean in more ways than one. With sincere thanks to all our panelists for your rich contributions today. You've certainly challenged us and affirmed us to reframe our thinking altogether, not just to look at stresses, but question the deep origins of those stresses, to look at how we value our traditional knowledge, and yes, seeing it as part and parcel of science, and also valuing how we have been acting. We have been moving towards an inspiring and engaging ocean and have passed many milestones along the way. I think something that stays with me, and I believe many of the audience here today as well, is the importance of decentralizing ourselves from this human-centric agenda, so to speak, and seeing ourselves as part of Moana. Our origin, as Reverend Nicotemo stated at the beginning, and an entity that is deserving of our reverence based on a deep connection that we all have the responsibility to foster in ourselves and in one another. And so with our sincere thanks to all our panelists for your time today and to our audience for your ongoing engagement, we will now journey on to view the final Futures Triangle, fully populated with your responses. But before we do, we will view a contribution by Peter Sipeli, a poet, performer, and writer of Fiji, sharing his poetry with us today. think you might still
Okay.
unmute yourself, Peter.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay, cool. My name is Peter. I'm a poet. I'm based here in Suva. I wrote this poem in 2017 for my father called Maps of the Ancestors. It's a pretty long poem, so I'm going to do a smaller version of it. I will just begin the piece. In 3 parts, I come here today, my friends, my tongue, Nayamengu, a library of stories within stories of my life and all the lives of my ancestors. Inside of me, they sit thick on my tongue like salt. My belly, Nakitengu, where my sacred self is sleeping, where borrowed dreams and my inherited mana transmit memories and power through my skin. My head, Naulungu, where I pick up radio frequencies of my other selves. I hear voices of my people in languages that I cannot understand, and like waves, they roll in and out of my body, this vessel, this canoe that I bring here today, Yamengu. I am the sum of my parents, part island with sand and song between the folds of my heart, part city with grit and dirt under my fingernails and skinned into the flesh of my knees. My tongue is thick in the voice of the Kaivalangi, but my brown is true as my mother's skin and proud as her lineage that she carried like flags wrapped around her hips and tucked deep in her throat. You see, I sleep with ghosts, ghosts that don't know my name, ghosts that don't dance on my tongue, but they know me. They smile in faces like mine. They sing to me their songs like hugs only large people can give in voices, part mine, part water, part wood, and heavy with the scent of the sea. And like the heavy celestial bodies of stars and of dreams, these voices call me. They call me. I hear the call, and most often I am afraid. I am the son of the ocean, of men that came in cloaks of Western reason and rhymes, in canoes the size of mountains, men heavy with ambition and conquest. And us, we smiled and gave them ourselves. We smiled and gave them ourselves. Our smiles are weapons. Our smiles smell of blood and of sweat. And our smiles are prayers, small, defiant, silent prayers, sometimes heard only by the sea. And then we folded our hearts into small graves that we dug in the sand close to the water. And we folded our broad shoulders and proud hearts into cloth. And we found value in shame. And our bodies became ornaments in a museum, a graveyard of our stories. And we stood silent and we faced the wind with our hearts in our hands, smaller versions of ourselves. You see, today, my friends, I begin to draw my maps, maps of space and place and time, maps of stars and of constellations, maps of places my ancestors occupied, places they left parts of themselves, and the rock and bark and the trees and in the leaves and in the rivers and in the wind, they remain forever here, forever watching, forever inside. Our bodies are part earth and sky, and our stories are inked into our eyes and on our tongues. And I keep drawing my maps in the sand. And each time the tide comes in, I draw new maps. Ulungu, no lungu. My head, where knowledge not my own stirs. It is forbidden to touch someone's head or hair in Fiji. This is sacred. We believe this part of our bodies keeps us connected to the gods, keeps us connected to each other. And our bodies are extensions of the land, the Vanua. My head is a cathedral of memories, most not my own. I am the face of my father and the skin of my ancestors. Inside of me they sit. Inside of me they dance. Inside of me they stand, all speaking at the same time, in frenzied whispers and in silent verse. Original sin I was born into and baptized into Roman crimson cloth, robes heavy with the scent of guilt. I am the burden of theft, of innocence taken inside the hands of home. And I am the face of my grandfather and the stubbornness of my father. And I hope I carry the heart of Epeli and I hold the soul of Konai. You see, without maps, I make new maps. And these are the maps that I taste in the morning light. These are the maps that are tattooed in the insides of my mouth and lay here sleeping in the palms of my hand. And as I stand at the edge of memory, where words fail and movement is prayer, and in my dream memory, I see the faces of all those that have gone before. I see the faces of my parents. I see Teresia. Their smiles radiant with the moon in their mouths. They have crossed over to the other side. They have given their names back to the sky. No longer physical, we whisper their names slowly in our heads. You see, my friends, the ancestors don't dance on my tongue, but they speak to me. And I know that here in my belly where the fire burns, and here sitting inside the blink of my blind Western eye, and sometimes resting on the ridge of my brown smile, the ancestors sit, and I think they smile at me, my friends. Today, I begin to draw these maps, maps of space and place and time, of stars and of constellations, maps of places my ancestors occupied, places they left parts of themselves, in rock and bark and tree, and in the leaves and in the rivers and in the wind, they remain forever here, forever watching, forever inside. Our bodies are part earth and sky, and our stories are inked into our eyes and on our tongues. And I keep drawing my maps in the sand, and each time the tide comes in, I draw new maps. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Such a fitting contribution to map and chart our onward journey. We now hand over to Mema and the strategy planning and learning team with the final backcast for our viewing. I think you may just need to unmute, Mema.
Mary, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thank you, Mary, once again. Welcome back, and thank you for your valuable contribution on our for our backcasting activity. What you're watching on now, as your Vaka is approaching the shores of Viti level, is your contribution to our navigation. In the interest of time, I will not read them out, but you can see, and we'll have it in the chat box for your information and reference. Today, through this activity, we've co-created a vision of what an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean may look like together. We've backcasted to project what some of the transformative actions and events that took place during the ocean decade, and thought about our own role in delivering of these visions. Te sa whaotile utu alfaimia is a Samoan saying that originates and associates with the art of fishing or voyaging. It speaks to the collective nature in any voyage's preparation. In the preparation of our voyage, you search for the best tools, and in that search, a fisherman or a voyager reaches out to the others for support. It reflects the inclusive nature of the preparation where everything is brought to the fore. It speaks to the sharing and caring nature of our Pacific community in terms of responsibilities and resources. Futures thinking is based on the premise that the future is created by us. It is not something that is done to us. We are not passengers on the Vaka being led to our future. We need to prepare and know who we need to be with us on the Vaka, including our children, our youth, and our women, and recognize that we all have a role in charting the course and navigating towards the future of the Pacific Ocean we want. We hope you've enjoyed this introduction to the Futures Triangle and Backcasting as two of the several foresight tools and this voyage on the Vaka Moana. Malo le folau, whaftai mai manuia.
Minaka Vakalevu Mema. Thank you so much, and to you, our audience, for your contributions. With so much learning and insights gained on our journey on the Vaka Moana, please enjoy this offering from Solomon Islands, Likawai Asi, courtesy of composer and artist Kelvin Rore and Nati Doleasi. The title means Gathering of the Ocean in the Malay Tamil language, and we hope you enjoyed.
Pasi Talaelana Hafalilana Isingana Pasi To kasui E to katau Oi
An audiovisual composition there from the Solomon Islands, representing the gathering power of the ocean and its significance to us both culturally and globally. As we near the end of our journey together on the Vaka Moana, I now invite our closing speaker, the Director General of the Pacific Community, Dr. Stuart Minchin, to address us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Pacific Ocean Commissioner, our early career ocean professionals, ocean champions, practitioners and colleagues. The UN Decade of Ocean Science is designed to help us reset our relationship with the ocean. We have a decade to transform our increasing scientific and our rich traditional knowledge into solutions and actions to improve the ocean's health before it's too late. Compared to other parts of the world, we in the Pacific have a good foundation for this, as we also have a rich source of traditional knowledge and customs. This collective wisdom of science and traditional knowledge is the bedrock upon which a secure future for the people of the Pacific can be built. We heard today some great examples of this during the laboratory on an inspiring and engaging Pacific Ocean future. Having listened to the event, I can say that very sincerely that the passion for ocean action is flourishing in our Blue Pacific. All of you will have a leading role to play in the next 10 years and beyond to reverse the decline in ocean health. We have much work to do, and we should not be satisfied until the ocean's well-being has been secured and we have restored our relationship with the ocean to one of reverence, respect and balance. It is the foundation of the unique cultures and practices of the Pacific. It is our food bank. It is our country's economic backbone. It is the centerpiece of livelihoods across the region, and it is ultimately our children's shared inheritance. I thank you all for participating, and I particularly thank my colleagues at SPC and the Pacific Community Centre for Ocean Science for organising this opportunity for our region to engage meaningfully with the UN Decade of Ocean Science. Vinaka, merci, and thank you.
With much gratitude to you, our audience, our presenters, our speakers, panelists, and creative performers today, we leave you with this video montage, answering the question that weighs on all our hearts: what does an inspiring and engaging ocean look like to me? Thank you for your time and contributions. Vinaka Vakalebo for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lúa hãy na bài lòng hãy nuôi hãy khi hãy lú wana o kana we kalani na we kahunwa na e kahunwa o la I kahunwa o la kahunwa du da vai rau de tu na pa a ke ka naka mauli ki he mauli ola ki he mauli ola aloha.
An inspiring and engaging ocean
is one that is able to provide a blue economic perspectives to its marine ecosystem planning while recognizing its various and complex users and stakeholders through a consultative dialogue process.
where we meld scientific data and traditional knowledge to have a better, healthier ocean for future generations.
Is an ocean that is healthy and has many living organisms in it that are yet to be discovered.
It's one that is clean and where people can swim and enjoy themselves with their friends and their family.
Incorporating the elements of transdisciplinarity, having community inclusive policy, and involving the youths from in and around the Pacific would make an engaging and inspiring Pacific Ocean.
If we can all recognize that the ocean is our endowment fund, which we hold in trust for future generations, and that as its custodians, we are required to respect it, to invest in it, and to care for it through sustainable use and conservation efforts, then we will be able to continue benefiting from all of its bounties in even greater ways.
Let the ocean dictate the terms of development engagement. Listen to its voice. Acknowledge its mystery, treat it as family, understand its spiritual symbolism to indigenous peoples. Value the fact that because of the interconnectedness of life, the health of the land and the peoples is inseparable from the health of the ocean.
An inspiring and engaging ocean is one where the people and nature interact harmoniously, where the wonders of the ocean inspire the youth to pursue careers in conservation and preservation of our Mother Earth, and where the ocean can continue to sustain our lifestyles and our culture.
The ocean is important to all of us. It is critical, it provides life, it is our icebox. That's how my uncle calls it, the icebox. As you can see around us, there are people using it for recreational purposes. It is life. The ocean is our life and our livelihood. Climate change is real, and the shore is coming and receding, the waters is receding. The ocean is what we call ourselves. We come from this place. And so any way that we can protect our oceans, it's all connected. Continental and island people, we depend upon the ocean. Aloha.
As a Pacific Islander, when you think about the ocean, you think about life, you think about livelihoods and health and wealth. It's so important to us that we must always maintain its health. We must always make sure that it's respected. We must always make sure that we protect it, we give it the love, because we get so much out of it.
If life is but a single leap that time and tide will mend, then let me take a running jump and clear the shallow end. Let me shout to wake the world and get me good and wet, and let my splash make tidal waves. Give them something to forget. I wrote that poem when I was 15 years old. I have always loved the ocean, and I keep coming back to the ocean because it inspires me. I hope we can all be inspired at the beginning of this new decade to take on new challenges and to take this big leap together.
Ko he mana he kau. Hive tau haku he mowi. No fo au mai mga fo haku he motu fulu ala ko liwe whekai nukutu taha.
Home to Niue, island across the sea, where paradise will always be.
My mother is from the East Coast. Piniane haku puatua. My father is from the West Coast. Alitu alofitanga. And Alofitokelau. And we live in Alofitokelau. And this is where I live. Wait, what? Oops. Wrong house. We can't afford it. But we live on on the same island. Today I will show you a part of my unique life here in Niue. When I want to eat fresh fish, I get it from the sea. And when I want to eat fresh taro, I get it from the bush. Come with me. I'll show you how I do these things.
Peace and harmony with my home island, the place I long to be. Home to Niue, island across the sea, where paradise will always be.
Look, I've got a fish. Just kidding. My father shot it. I'm still learning.
My homeland, Niue is for me.
This is my job, cleaning the catch bag.
Aini moe haku akaina, tumaue mana tukiai. Oi motune panau ai au, omui moe loto pia pia. Matamaka he Pasifika, Niue koe haku motu mo oli. Tumaue mana tukiai. Home to Niue, island across the sea, where paradise will always be. My little paradise, greetings Wakalohpalayatu, hospitality. My homeland, Niue is for me. Home to Niue.
There's my taro, onions, and fish, not even 10 hours old. So please help us to spread the message and do our part against climate change, so we can continue to enjoy the blessings that God has shown you. Protect the Pacific from climate change. We want the world to know who we are. We contribute the least emission and yet we're faced with the most severe consequences. Help us. Click, like, share, and tell us where you are in the world. Don't forget to hashtag #OneWorldOurPacific from Tony Niue Warriors for Future. Chee-hoo!